Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Virtual Eclipse Community Meetup. I'm your host, Stephanie Swart, and today I'm joined by Martin Lippert, who will be showcasing Spring Tools 4, the new Spring Tools generation for Spring Boot. So without further ado, Martin, the floor is all yours.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me on this Virtual Eclipse Community session. Great to be here. So I would like to show you the new Spring Boot tools and everything that we did for Spring Tools 4. Therefore, I first will do some slides, just a few, and then do everything in sort of a live demo session and live coding session. So let me share my screen for you. And do some slides at the beginning. So it's all about the new Spring Tools 4. So it's all about developer tooling, right? So our mission, and I work for Pivotal, and I work on the Spring Tools team. So and the Spring team, and then the Tools sub team. And our mission is to support Spring developers all around the globe to provide the best environment and the best support for Spring applications. So that's our mission. And the journey for that mission already started way back in, I think, 2005 with the first version of the Spring IDE extension for Eclipse. So the team wrote extensions and plugins for Eclipse to support Spring developers. That was called Spring IDE back in these days. And it turned into some kind of a bigger thing called Spring Tool Suite that you can download as a ready-to-use Eclipse-based distribution to support Spring developers. And we, as a team, we sort of looked back at these years of developing extensions for Eclipse for Spring, and it was really interesting because the time when we sort of started that work, the world was different, right? It looked different back in these days. Most people were using Spring using XML configuration files. So with these huge, can you still remember these huge XML configuration files for finding your beans and dependency injections and things like that? Eclipse was more or less the only world-dominating IDE for Java stuff, and the whole Spring IDE experience and the features were designed for this world back then. So of course it was not kind of implemented then and then left alone. We improved it. We supported different extensions, Java annotation model, everything. But the core architecture and the core idea was still built around this view of the world back then. So we thought it's time to take a fresh look and see what can we do different for the future and what can we build for future Spring developers using modern Spring technologies. And that's why we released the all-new Spring Tools 4. The Spring Tools 4 is a complete rewrite from scratch for most of the parts of the Spring tooling. So it's not really kind of an improved Spring IDE version. It's really completely new, based on new tooling technology like the language server protocol, and it's built in an IDE agnostic way. So that's why with Spring Tools 4 we have now an Eclipse-based distribution. So you can, as in the old days, you can download an Eclipse distribution with the Spring Tools 4 pre-installed, but you can also use VS Code, for example, as an environment and install the Spring Tools 4 language server as an extension, or even Atom, and maybe even more in the future. So that's kind of that's the background of what I'm going to show you today. And what I would like to do is dive into live demos and show you what's possible using the all-new Spring Tools 4. And of course, since this is a virtual Eclipse community meeting, I will use my Eclipse environment and my Eclipse distribution for Spring Tools 4 to show you all of that. So the first thing I guess this looks familiar to you. It's an Eclipse environment, Spring Tools 4, and I have a bunch of things in my workspace. But before I start looking at more complex projects, I would like to show you how easy it is to get started with a Spring-based project, especially Spring Boot-based projects in Eclipse. Usually, when people start with Spring Boot, they go to start.spring.io. this is kind of the main, most prominent way to get started. You type something in, like the group ID in the artifact. You select if you want to use Maven or Gradle, the Spring Boot version you want to use, and then you select all your dependencies, like, oh, let's do some kind of web or reactive web or whatever, all the modules. You could even switch to the full version and see all the different modules that are there for getting started with Spring Boot. Then usually you would kind of download the project as a zip file and port that, but we integrated all that into Eclipse. So what you can do, you can just go in Eclipse, say new Spring start a project, and then you can type in the starter URL. In this case, it's started.spring.io. That's kind of the default one. But for example, if you're working in a company, maybe you have forked start.spring.io since it's open source, and running your own version, maybe with your own modules, you could use that in the tooling too, by putting in the URL in here. So I can do all that, right? Select the Java version, Maven, and so on. But the most interesting part is on the next page, where I can select all my dependencies. In this case, I have my frequently used things, the actuator and the web. So, but I could also search for web. As you know, what do I have? Let me choose this one. If I hover over it, I get some additional information, some links for guides and reference documentation, things like that. So it makes it really easy. And then I just press finish, and then I'm ready to go. I have my Maven project, and it's a ready-to-use Spring Boot project that I could just go ahead with and run. That's all I need to do, and then I'm ready to go. If I want, for example, let me implement quickly something like a controller, very basic REST stuff. REST controller with a get mapping. There's a little snippet in the tooling to implement something like a get request mapping. Yeah, let me do some basic stuff here, right? The real old school hello world example. So I'm done with that. My first Spring Boot application, my first REST endpoint, in maybe under a minute or so. And I can go to the boot dashboard. That's a piece that you might be familiar with because it was already part of the old Spring Tools 3 or STS, Spring Tool Suite 3. So we brought that over to Spring Tools 4. And I can just run the demo project here for you. So that's starting up. And I can double click on that. It opens up a browser. Just nothing because I don't have a kind of the root URL is not being served. There's just the, what did I do? I called it greeting. So I could type in something like greeting and I get hello world. That's it. That's cool. This boot dashboard is really something like the central control unit of all your boot projects in your workspace, because you can do so much great stuff with it. You see all the boot projects in your workspace. You can just run them. You can rerun them. You can stop them, run them in debug mode. That's just one click away. You can jump to the console output. It opens up the right console for this running application, and you can take a look at this. You see, oh, this is kind of serving localhost 8080, so the port shows up. You don't have to look up the port. And the log output, you can just double click and it opens up the right port. And for example, here I can put in my standard, my default URL that I would like to use most often when I start that. So when let me close this again. When I double click, it opens up that URL extension by default, which is quite nice because it makes things so easy. It's just one click away. You could also kind of filter things. So if you work on a lot of Spring Boot projects, you can filter the view and see just a few of them, or just a specific set, or just a specific working set. That's pretty easy. Pretty great stuff. Okay, so that's my tiny little thing, but I think more important and more interesting are more complex Spring projects, because you start easy, start with a small thing, start at Spring.io, but then it grows, becomes a really, really meaningful Spring project. So let me stop the demo one and move over to what I have here in my workspace, the pet clinic project. One of these standard samples for Spring. This one is based on Spring Boot. And again, I can just go ahead and run it from the boot dashboard, and then it runs. It starts up, double click, here it is. But in this example, there's a tiny little artificial kind of error, which is the welcome message is not configured. So I would like to use this example to find out what's going wrong under the hood. How can I debug this? How can I find out what's wrong with it, and show you all the nice Spring features of the tooling using this example? In this case, let me go back to the pet clinic application. So this is my application, and more or less, I could browse the package explorer and see what's going on here. Yeah, that looks all fine. But there's a super easy navigation for all your Spring elements in your project. If you press Command or Control 6, depending on the platform, Control 6, it shows you all the different Spring elements of your project. And that's just, and you see how fast it is? It's really super quick. It shows you everything. So in this case, for example, if I would like to see what are the request mappings, I can do add / and I see all the request mappings that are defined in my project. And in my project, for example, if I would like to see, oh, what's add / owners, what's that path, where is that defined, I can just go there and jump to exactly where this request mapping of Spring is implemented. So super quick overview about all the request mappings that are here in my projects, in my workspace. It's really, really easy. Another cool thing is that I can take a look at what are all my beans, all the beans that are defined. So if I want, for example, take a look at where's my, maybe it's called welcome thing. See, oh, there's a welcome controller. That sounds great. That might sound like the thing that I should take a look at to find out what the problem here is. So I can just jump there and see, oh, there's my welcome message controller, the welcome controller at the beginning. Oh, and it serves actually that URL. I could also do this, of course, the quick navigation, and jump to that directly. So this quick navigation gives you an overview about all and understands all the Spring elements of your project, and gives you super quick overview and super quick access to all your Spring elements. You can super easily navigate the whole project and get an overview about what's in there. So this is really useful. This is, for example, one reason why there is no, in the old tooling, we had a specific view called the request mapping view, where you can see all the request mappings in a list down here. That's not there anymore because it's so easy. It's just one click away, and then you get all the request mappings with additional information and super easy keyboard enabled navigation to all of that. And it's super, super quick. You don't need to do anything for that. It just shows up for you automatically once you have a project, a Spring Boot project in your workspace. Okay, so I can take a look at that and see, this is my welcome controller. So it serves, oh, there's a message provider thing that gets auto-wired with a message provider. So that looks all good, but something goes wrong. It looks like something goes wrong at runtime, which could happen, right? If you use Spring Boot, there are components being wired at runtime by Spring. So sometimes you find yourself in a situation where you don't exactly know what happens at runtime. So this is why we are introducing something called the live hovers. In order to show you live information from the real already running application, let me stop that application. You need to have the boot actuators module on the class path. Therefore, I would like to add that. Instead of modifying the POM file manually, I can kind of open up this starter wizard again and just add the actuator module to this project. So super easy way again to add that. And then I start the project again. So what the tooling is able to do now is, once the app is started, show me live information from the running application. And this is something completely new. This I guess you've never seen this before, because it now overlays your source code with additional information from the running Spring application. For example, you see the green highlights, and these are all the places in your source code where live information is showing up. For example, you see this get mapping thing is highlighted with this green background, tells you this request mapping is active at runtime. It's active in this process. That's my running pet cleaning application. And this is the URL. So I can directly click on that, jump to that. I can see this directly. I can jump to that directly from the source code to the live application. This is super easy and super great. If I have, for example, this controller is a bean under the hood. So if I hover over the add controller thing, I can see, oh, this bean is actually there. It's active. There's a welcome controller bean that's active at runtime in this application. This is great. The other interesting thing is, in this case, there's the auto-wired annotation where my message provider is being auto-wired, but that's not highlighted. That means this auto-wired thing, just a standard Java hover showing up, but it's not highlighted. Looks like this auto-wired annotation, that there's nothing being auto-wired at runtime. So what's going on here? So let's take a look. Let's use the quick navigation thing. If we can see if there is a message provider. Oh, there's a property-based welcome message provider being defined in my source code. Maybe that's it. Let's take a look. Property-based welcome message provider. That looks good. It reads a property, kind of a welcome message, and returns the welcome message. So that's what I want to see in my app. But this component, which I can see here, the add component thing, that's not highlighted. It means this component doesn't exist at runtime in my running bean, my running boot application. So this is an important information. But why? There's an add conditional on property being defined, so this bean should only be active if there is a specific property available or around at runtime. So when I hover over that, I can see there's a green hover, a green highlight. When I hover over that, I can see, oh, a conditional on property did not find the property pet cleaning welcome message. That's why this condition is not fulfilled. Therefore, the component is not being created at runtime. And this is extremely valuable information because it tells you exactly what happens at runtime. And this is not only limited to, let's say, these add component or add conditional. The interesting piece is, for example, when I take a look at the owner controller, in this case, I can see there's a bunch of stuff being highlighted, right? The mappings, you've already seen there. You can directly jump to those request mappings. So that is great. But more interestingly, if you hover over this controller, you can not only see that this controller is active, so it exists at runtime in the running application, you can see that there's another bean, the owner repository, being wired into or injected into this controller. That's why the arrow goes to the left side. This one is injected into this controller. And it happens with this auto-wired constructor. So you can directly see this auto-wired constructor gets this owner repository injected. And I can even navigate to that owner repository to see what's going on there. Oh, there's an owner repository. This is cool. Interestingly, in this case, there's no annotation being defined, but it still shows up some hover. When I hover over here, it tells me this is a Spring Bean being created from this interface by Spring Data, and it gets injected into, that's why the arrow goes to the right. So this one is being injected into the owner controller and into the pet controller. So in both classes. So I could jump to them again with this quick URL and click on it with this hyperlink. And I can also see there's a JPA meta model mapping context being injected into this owner repository. Nothing I can really see directly in the source code because it's the Spring Data stuff generates the repository implementation for me with all these wirings. But it's really, really good to see and good to know that this happens. So, but let me go back to my property-based welcome message provider, which doesn't really do anything here because my property is not being defined. So let's take a look at the application properties file. And there is specific support for writing these property files too in the new Spring Tools 4. So for example, when I just type something like spring dot whatever, I can see exactly all the available properties from the Spring Boot modules. So there's no need to look up all the available properties in your browser via Google or whatever. You can just type something and see what shows up at the content assist. For example, let me try to define something like the port, and the content shows me, oh, there's a server port. Let me do this and type in hello. It also tells me, no. Hello is not a valid server port. It's expecting an integer. So it knows about the types and what's necessary and what's expected for this property. So very nice support in this property editor. Oh, there's a comment put in front of my thing, my pet clinic welcome message property. So let's enable this property definition and press save. Something I haven't mentioned before is that this project, it has the boot DevTools on the class path, the module. This module, if you put the boot DevTools on your class path, it watches your class path. And whenever something changes, like what I did, for example, changing a property file or changing a class, changing an implementation, adding a new method, whatever, it quickly restarts your application under the hood, which is really nice because it starts up super quick. Not the JVM is not being shut down. It's just the Spring Boot application part. So the JVM continues to run, but it restarts the boot part. So your state is lost, but it restarts super quickly. So this is changed. Let me go back to my welcome controller. I can quickly jump to there to see, oh, the new welcome message shows up. That's awesome. So we found out what was wrong with my example using two of the main and most awesome new features of the Spring Tools 4, which is the super quick navigation, giving you an overview about what's going on here, and the live hovers giving you a unique insight into your application. In this case, you can see even the difference now. So you can see the controller is being wired with a property-based welcome message provider because that bean is there now. And you can even see in the auto-wired annotation, this gets the property-based welcome message provider now. So really deep and unique insight into your running Spring Boot application, which I think really helps you a lot. The cool thing about that is it happens more or less automatically for you as soon as you put the actuators on your class path. So it recognizes the processes running on your local machine using Spring Boot, matches those processes on your source code or for your source code, and provides the right information at the right source code. So this is great. There is another option for you if you want to do this not only for applications that are running locally, but applications that are running, for example, in a cloud environment. So if you deploy your Spring Boot application to a cloud environment and you want to see the same information for that, you can configure that manually. Or if you, for example, in this case, running Cloud Foundry and deploy your app to a Cloud Foundry installation from within the boot dashboard, you could do the same directly from within the IDE. Right? So if I would deploy that thing to my Cloud Foundry, in this case, it's Pivotal Web Services at run.pivotal.io. I deploy that app and automatically create a tunnel under the hood, tunnels all the necessary information back to my IDE, and I would see exactly what's going on in my app running on Cloud Foundry within my IDE, directly within my source code at the right place in the same way than for local applications, which I think is really cool. Okay, so those are some of the, I think, most advanced and most interesting features of the new Spring tooling. I will not be able to cover everything that we built into the tooling, but before I hand over to Stephanie again for questions, and I would be very happy to answer as many questions as are there, I would like to show you something else. In this case, I have another project called Stock Quotes. And I would like to show you that the quick navigation that we built into the tooling using Command 6 is really smart. It cannot only analyze your Spring annotations, like request mappings, get mapping, post mapping, and so on. It can also analyze your functional route definitions if you chose Spring Webflux to define your stuff. So in this case, there's a functional definition for the routes, for hello, echo, quotes, and so on. And if I press Command 6 again, get an overview about the request mappings that I defined here, about the paths that I defined, I can see exactly the same and jump to them. Even if I use the functional style, I get the same kind of super quick overview, super quick navigation. And more interestingly, in this case, I'm usually referring to a handler method that does the real work. So when I go there, I usually don't see anything like this in front of the method. So usually I'm lost. I don't know what path does this handler method belong to. But the tooling is smart enough to show you that as what's in Eclipse now called a code lens. So it inserts additional information at the top of this source code line for you and shows you, okay, this handler method is mapped to, this path. The HTTP method get, defined for quotes, path, and accepting application.json. So you can directly see the relationship between the handler method and the thing, and the implementation, and the route definition. Showing you the code lenses here reminds me that I would like to show you some additional usage of code lenses. There is some experimental, some kind of a secret flag. No, okay, maybe it's not so secret anymore now. But there is a flag that you can enable in the preferences. You should really try that out. I really like that, but some people don't, and we're still working on that. So that's why it's experimental. If you go to the preferences, choose language servers, and select the Spring Boot language server, there's the highlights code lens, which is experimental. So let's do that. If you enable that, it uses the same technology under the hood, so it shows you code lenses for your highlights, for your live information from the live running app directly in your source code. Some people like that, some people don't. We don't know yet exactly what the right way to show that is. But I think it's already pretty useful, because for the request mapping, for example, you don't need to hover over this highlight, this mapping, to see what's the URL behind that. You can see the URL directly above, and you can even directly click on that and jump to that, which I think is pretty useful. And for the bean wirings, you also see a nice little summary for the wirings. In this case, you see, if you hover over, you would see, oh, there's a property-based welcome message provider being injected into this controller. But you can already see this directly above the annotation as a code lens, which I think it's pretty useful, pretty cool stuff. So you should definitely try and enable this not so secret anymore feature in the preferences for the code lens highlights. Cool. With that, I think I covered most of my demo part. So let me quickly switch back to my slides, give you a brief outlook about the Spring Tools 4. So the public beta went out in December last year. The GA release was just released in the end of September. And if you are looking for the Spring Tools Suite 3.9. whatever that was there before, you can still use that. So if you prefer the old tooling because, for example, you still have Spring XML files in your projects and you would like to keep the support in the old way in your IDE, you can still use that. It's being maintained, and we will provide updates at least until mid of next year with the regular Eclipse updates and Eclipse releases and so on. And you could even do something magic. You could install an extension pack that's called the STS3 add-on pack, and you can install that into a new Spring Tools 4 installation distribution. That way, you would end up with kind of an Eclipse distribution that contains both the new world, Spring Tools 4, and the old world, the old tooling. I would not recommend that for kind of the preferred use case, because I really like to keep my IDEs as lightweight as possible and as small as possible, and not install too many things into that. That's why I think I would maybe prefer to use Spring Tools 4 for one workspace and Spring Tools 3 for a different workspace with a different set of projects. But if you are in a situation where you need really both things at the same time, you could install them into each other if you want to. Okay, yeah. With that, I would like to thank you for this part, and switch over to Stephanie for maybe some questions that people might have. So, Stephanie, are there any questions?
So thanks for a great demo and presentation, Martin. That was fantastic. And we got some positive feedback from the community who said this was very helpful and supportive. As of right now, we don't have any questions, but channel and community, feel free to drop it on the YouTube chat, on our Twitter feed, or the meetup page, and we will send them over to Martin to answer. So again, I'd like to say thank you to Martin for presenting today. It was very
Thank you.
informative. It was fantastic, and this will definitely be a great resource for people to utilize and learn. So
Awesome.
thanks, everybody, and we'll see you at the next Virtual Eclipse Community Meetup. Have a great one.
Thanks.